The newly activated divine engine radiated a low-frequency vibration, its energy barely contained. It felt like the scrape of metal against bone. The prelates called it a confluence, another ritual to placate the creators. It was always cold near an activated divine engine, the very air seeming to recede from the massive construct, as if even the atmosphere itself bowed before its power. Around me, the chamber was a study in polished obsidian, reflecting the divine engine's fluctuating light in a disorienting dance of shifting luminescence. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all composed of the same seamless, dark material, giving the impression of being inside a vast, empty geode. This was Viridia, my city, the city I was sworn to protect, even from itself. I stood at attention, a statue carved from the same unyielding material as the chamber, my crimson hammer armor a dull, dark crimson in the low light. It was more than armor. It was an extension of myself, a second skin that amplified my strength, my speed, my senses. It was a symbol of my authority, of the prelate's trust, a tangible representation of my purpose. The brand on my left arm, the stylized crimson hammer, itched beneath the alloy. The telltale buzz in my teeth hadn't ceased since the last anomaly incursion in the lower levels. 3 this week, a new record even during the worst of times. The prelates called it a test of faith, but their carefully schooled expressions when they thought no one was looking betrayed a hint of something else. Fear, uncertainty, no. They were the chosen of the creators. Fear was for the citizens of Viridia, uncertainty for those who doubted. My eyes remained fixed on the divine engine. It was a monolith of the supposed creator's power, a power channeled through the prelates, or so we were taught. The divine engine, as the prelates explained it, regulated the flow of time within Viridia's boundaries. Each of these massive constructs, strategically placed throughout the city, emitted a carefully calibrated field that maintained temporal stability. It was this control over time, they claimed, that allowed Viridia to flourish, protected from the ravages of the outside world, a world supposedly lost to temporal chaos. They controlled the weather, extended the day and night cycles when necessary, and ensured the optimal growth period for the synthetic food supply. This control was the source of their power, their divine right to rule, a right bestowed upon them by the creators. The official history of Viridia, drilled into us from selection, played in my mind like a worn recording. The arrival of the benevolent creators, the gift of the divine engine, the rise of the prelates as their chosen intermediaries, and the establishment of the rigid, ordered society we lived in today. Order. That was the cornerstone of our existence, the bedrock upon which Viridia was built. And I, Mandur, the inevitable, was the enforcer of that order, the ultimate instrument of the prelate's will. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface of the divine engine, a figure as cold and unyielding as the machine itself. Enhanced genetics, courtesy of the Crimson Hammer program, made me taller, stronger, faster than any ordinary citizen. My face, a roadmap of past conflicts, was impassive. Eyes the color of tarnished steel revealed nothing. The Crimson Hammers. We were more than just soldiers. We were the embodiment of the prelate's authority, their iron fist. Our training was designed to break us down and rebuild us as perfect weapons. We were taught to obey without question, to execute orders without hesitation, to feel nothing but unwavering loyalty to the prelates and satisfaction in a completed mission. And I was their best. The most dedicated, the most efficient, the one entrusted with the most sensitive tasks. The anomalies, that's what the prelates called them. Citizens exposed to uncontrolled divine engine fluctuations. I've seen what it does to them. Not just the physical deformities, but the mental fragmentation as well. One man I apprehended could only speak in reverse, his words a jumbled mess of backwards sentences that still chilled me, even though I couldn't understand them. Another woman, her body phasing in and out of visibility, begged me to kill her, her eyes wide with a terror I could almost taste, a terror far deeper than any physical pain. We rounded them up, these fractured souls, and delivered them to the Citadel, where they were subjected to recalibration. The re-education of dissidents was another of my responsibilities. It wasn't always about physical violence, although that was certainly a tool in our arsenal. More often, it was about breaking their will, about dismantling their beliefs and replacing them with the prelate's approved doctrine. I remember one re-education session in particular. A young man, barely a man really, more like a boy, no older than 20, accused of spreading anti-prelate rhetoric. He was defiant at first, spitting venomous words about the false gods and their tyranny. He lasted 3 days in the interrogation chamber, 3 days of carefully calibrated pain, of sleep deprivation, of sensory overload, until his defiance crumbled, replaced by a hollow-eyed acceptance of his own errors. He left the chamber a shell, a puppet who would repeat whatever we told him to. That was 6 months ago. I saw him in the lower levels just last week. He didn't recognize me, didn't recognize anyone. He just swept the floors and stared at the wall when his shift was over. These were not easy tasks, but they were necessary. Necessary to maintain order, to ensure the survival of Viridia. I did what was required, without flinching, without remorse, without question. Or so I told myself. Lately, the faces of the re-educated have started to appear in my infrequent dreams, their broken eyes staring at me with silent accusation. I dismiss it as a minor malfunction, a temporary glitch in my programming. It will pass. It has to. A change in air pressure, like the sudden hush before a storm, preceded the opening of the obsidian doors. The prelates entered, their movements subtly off, each step and gesture slightly out of sync with natural human motion, creating a deeply unsettling effect. They wore their traditional ceremonial robes, heavy garments of a dark fabric that absorbed the ambient light, but their faces, as always, were obscured by opaque, featureless masks. The masks were a constant, a barrier between them and the rest of us, a symbol of their elevated status, their supposed connection to the creators. They were not what one would imagine when picturing divine beings. They were slight, frail even, their movements jerky, as if their bodies struggled to keep up with their minds. They acknowledged me with a curt nod, their masked faces betraying no emotion. I remained at attention as they positioned themselves around the construct, their movements synchronized, almost ritualistic. The confluence was about to begin. This was a ritual performed regularly, a complex sequence of manipulations of the divine engine's controls, designed, according to the prelates, to maintain its stability and appease the creators. As the prelates initiated the confluence, the chamber's air took on the sharp scent of burnt wire. The divine engine's typically steady illumination strobed erratically, casting jagged light patterns across the obsidian walls like cracks spreading across their surface. The rhythmic vibration escalated to a jarring, irregular pulse that throbbed unpleasantly in my chest. This was not the controlled energy flow I knew. The prelates, normally fluid and precise, now hesitated, their hands pausing above the control panels, their masked faces turning towards each other in what I interpreted as alarm. Their synchronicity was fractured, their silent communication disrupted. They were out of sync, off-kilter, like a finely tuned machine grinding itself apart. The ceremony continued, but the rhythm was broken. They were losing their grip, and the knowledge of it, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. When the ritual was finally completed, the prelates, instead of retreating to their secluded chambers within the citadel, summoned me. Their masked leader, his voice, usually a model of calm authority, was strained, almost urgent. "Manda," he began, his voice distorted by the mask's vocoder, "a situation has arisen that requires your immediate attention. A mechanic, Verin, has obtained sensitive information, heretical data that contradict the sacred teachings. He must be silenced." The name was unfamiliar, but the threat was clear. In Viridia, heresy was the ultimate crime, punishable by re-education. He claims, the prelate continued, his voice hardening, that the divine engine are not divine gifts, but ancient machines, leftovers of a forgotten technology. He seeks to spread this lie, to sow discord among the populace. This cannot be allowed. He is believed to be hiding in the Undercity. Another prelate added, his voice barely a sibilant rustle through his mask. He must be found, and he must be silenced. Their fear was a tangible thing, a cold, clammy presence in the chamber. It was a fear I had never witnessed before. He will be found, I replied, and he will be silenced. My purpose was clear. My duty was absolute. I turned and left the chamber, the heavy obsidian doors sliding shut behind me. The hunt was on. As I strode through the corridors of the citadel, my mind raced. Verin, a mechanic, a nobody. How had he obtained such sensitive information? And why was he sharing it? What did he hope to gain? He was a grease-stained tinkerer. What could he possibly know about the divine engine? My steps led me to the Citadel's data center, where I accessed Verin's file. His image flashed on the screen, a man of average height and build, with dark, unkempt hair and eyes filled with a defiant intensity. A simple mechanic, yet he dared to challenge the foundation of Viridian society. He was a loose end, a threat to the order I was sworn to uphold. He was nothing, nobody. The prelates could have assigned any crimson hammer to this task, but they chose me, because they knew I would not fail, because I understood the stakes. This was not just about silencing a heretic, it was about maintaining control, about preventing the carefully constructed fabric of Viridian society from unraveling. I reviewed Verin's file thoroughly, analyzing his movements, his connections, his habits. He was predictable, routine-bound, like most citizens. But there was something else that set him apart. A spark of defiance, a hint of something more. It was in the way he held himself, the way he looked at the omnipresent surveillance cameras, as if he knew he was being watched but didn't care. According to the records, Verin had spent most of his life in the Undercity, working in one of the countless maintenance facilities that kept Viridia's aging infrastructure functioning. He was a skilled mechanic, but unremarkable until a few weeks ago, when he had suddenly gone rogue, disappearing from his assigned workstation and severing all contact with his designated social unit. He was careful, I'll give him that. He knew how to avoid the surveillance grids, how to move through the city unseen. But he was no match for me. He was just one man. As I descended into the Undercity, the once gleaming towers of the upper city were reduced to hulking silhouettes against the perpetual twilight, their lower reaches lost in a grimy haze. Here, in the belly of the beast, the prelates' control was more tenuous, their authority maintained through strategically placed checkpoints and the constant threat of the crimson hammers. The Undercity was a labyrinth of narrow tunnels, dilapidated structures and energy panels, a breeding ground for discontent, a haven for the forgotten and the dispossessed. It was a place I knew well. I had crushed countless uprisings in these shadowed corners, silenced dozens of voices that dared to speak out against the prelate's rule. My first stop was a grimy dive frequented by mechanics and labourers, a place Verin was known to visit, according to his file. The informant, a former associate of Verin, was waiting for me, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit space. He was a small man, his hands stained with grease and oil, his clothes threadbare. He was already halfway through his second glass of ale, a cheap, potent liquor favoured by the Undercity's inhabitants. He was terrified, and rightfully so. Snitches didn't last long in the Undercity, not unless they were useful. "You found something?" I asked, my voice low and menacing. My presence alone was usually enough to loosen tongues. He's looking for others," the informant stammered. "Others who believe the same thing." He couldn't even bring himself to say the words, the heretical lie that Verin was spreading. "He has something Something that proves it. Data fragments. He is trying to recruit. Where is he getting them? I pressed, my hand tightening around the grip of my energy weapon. And who is he recruiting? I don't know, the informant whined, his eyes wide with terror. He said he found old tech. From before. He's careful. Doesn't say much. But others are listening. They're starting to believe him. He took another large gulp of his drink, his hands shaking. He's not just hiding. He's building something. A following. So, Verin wasn't just a lone heretic spouting nonsense. He was a leader, a catalyst for something much larger and more dangerous. This was no longer just a simple hunt. It was a preemptive strike against a potential rebellion. The spark of discontent, always present in the Undercity, was threatening to become a wildfire, and Verin was fanning the flames. My grip on my weapon tightened. I had to find him, and I had to find him fast before his message spread any further. Before his heresy took root and grew into something I couldn't control. Before Viridia was consumed by the very chaos I was sworn to prevent. My purpose, once again, was clear. And as always, I would not fail. I was the inevitable. It was not just a title. It was a truth etched into my very being, and Verin was about to learn that firsthand. The Undercity was a breeding ground for dissent, a festering wound beneath the gleaming facade of the upper city. Each step deeper into its depths brought new evidence of decay, not just in the crumbling infrastructure but in the spirit of its inhabitants. Their faces held weariness and a simmering resentment, unlike the placid obedience common in the higher levels. It was a resentment I understood, even if I couldn't condone it. They were parts of a system, just as I was, but parts that had been left to rust and grind against each other, their purpose forgotten, their existence reduced to a struggle for survival. Verin was proving to be more than just a rogue mechanic. He was a symbol, a rallying point for the disaffected. My investigation led me through a network of informants, each encounter a carefully orchestrated dance of intimidation and thinly veiled threats. They were wary, tight-lipped, their loyalty to Verin surprisingly strong. They were mechanics, engineers, technicians, the very people who kept Viridia's aging infrastructure functioning, the invisible hands that maintained the illusion of order. They knew the city's guts, its hidden pathways, its vulnerabilities, and they were starting to believe that the prelates, the supposed guardians of their world, were nothing more than deceivers. One informant, a man named Ferret, had been particularly helpful, though not willingly. He had worked alongside Verin in the lower-level maintenance tunnels, and he had seen the change in him, the growing obsession with the old tech, the forbidden data fragments. He found something, Ferret had told me, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the grimy walls of his dwelling. Something that changed him. He started talking about the divine engine, about how they weren't what we were told. He said they were failing, that the prelates were losing control. And you believed him? I asked, my voice laced with calculated skepticism. He had looked at me then, his eyes filled with fear and a strange kind of understanding. He showed us proof. Data fragments, things we weren't supposed to see, things that made sense, in a way the prelate's teachings never did. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of labor, flexing them slowly as if they pained him. He said we were living a lie. His words echoed in my mind as I navigated the decaying tunnels. A lie. The thought was a dangerous one, a seed of doubt that threatened to take root in the carefully constructed fortress of my loyalty. I pushed it aside. Verin was the threat, not the prelates. He was the one spreading lies, not them. My duty was clear. My search for Verin eventually led me to a derelict maintenance facility, hidden deep within the Undercity, a place where the failing energy panels barely illuminated the rusting machinery. It was here that I found a deliberately placed set of schematics and documents left in plain sight on a grimy workbench. It was too obvious, too convenient. A trap, perhaps. But it was a trap laid specifically for me, that much was certain. Verin knew I was coming. He knew I would find this place. He wanted me to find it. The documents were written in plain Viridian, using simplified technical language, almost as if they were meant to be understood by someone without specialized knowledge. They detailed the divine engine's construction, their true purpose, their operation, and their limitations. They spoke of a time before the prelates, a time of technological upheaval and societal collapse. They described the divine engine not as divine gifts, but as tools, powerful and dangerous tools, created by a long-lost civilization, a civilization that had destroyed itself through its own hubris. There were handwritten notes scrawled in the margins, annotations in Verin's own hand, detailing his interpretations of the technical jargon, his concerns about the divine engine's stability, his fear for Viridia's future. One particular document contained crude yet detailed diagrams of its internal mechanisms, revealing a level of complexity that was staggering. Verin had painstakingly labeled each component, highlighting the flow of energy, the points of stress, the areas where the most serious malfunctions were occurring. He had even added his own calculations, his attempts to understand the rate of decay, the potential for catastrophic failure. These were not the simple monolithic structures depicted in the prelate's teachings. They were intricate, multifaceted machines composed of countless interconnected components, each one vital to their operation. But one thing was clear even to my untrained eye: they were not just regulating time. They were generating it, manipulating it, creating a localized temporal field that kept Viridia isolated from the outside world. And that field was fraying at the edges. The documents detailed the increasing instability of the network, the growing frequency of temporal distortions, the unpredictable behavior of the anomalies. They spoke of a critical threshold, a point of no return, beyond which the network would become unstable, their temporal fields collapsing, potentially leading to the annihilation of Viridia itself. For a fleeting moment, a sliver of doubt pierced my hardened exterior. Could it be true? Could the foundation of my reality, the bedrock of my entire existence, be a lie? The thought was a terrifying chasm opening beneath my feet, threatening to swallow me whole. But the doubt was quickly extinguished, replaced by a surge of anger, hot and sharp. This was a trick, a deception, a carefully crafted fabrication designed to sow discord and undermine the prelate's authority. Verin was a heretic, a liar, a traitor, and these documents were nothing more than elaborate forgeries designed to mislead and manipulate. The prelates were our saviors, the chosen of the creators, and the divine engine were the instruments of our salvation, not our destruction. My programming reasserted itself, flooding my mind with the familiar mantras of duty, loyalty, and order. These thoughts, these doubts, were dangerous, heretical, a betrayal of everything I stood for. They were a virus, and I was the cure. My orders were clear: find Verin, silence him, and suppress his lies. He was a threat to Viridia, a cancer that needed to be excised, and I was the inevitable, the instrument of the prelate's will, the protector of Viridia. This new information, rather than swaying me, hardened my resolve. He was not just a rogue mechanic anymore. He was a symbol of defiance, a rallying point for the discontented, and he had to be stopped. After days of pursuit, I tracked him to a hidden enclave in a partially collapsed section of the Undercity. It was a cavernous space, cluttered with salvaged technology, makeshift equipment, and discarded remnants of the old tech that Verin had used to fuel his heretical crusade. A small group of his followers huddled around him. They were engineers, mechanics, technicians. Verin stood in the center of the space, his eyes fixed on me as I approached. He was unarmed, but he held himself upright. He no longer looked like the grease-stained mechanic from his file. He was leaner, harder, his eyes burning. The failing light of the overhead energy panels illuminated the lines of strain around his mouth, the exhaustion in his eyes. Near him was a divine engine, smaller than the ones in the Citadel, but unmistakably the same technology. It was heavily modified, jury-rigged with salvaged components, its surface scarred and damaged. They had clearly tampered with it, no doubt attempting to manipulate its already unstable energy field. "Manda, I knew you'd come. You left me little choice," I replied. "Your actions have threatened the stability of Viridia. You have spread lies and incited rebellion." "Lies?" Varen scoffed. "I have shown them the truth about the divine engine, about the prelates, about the precarious state of our city." He gestured around the space. "Look around you. This is the reality of Viridia, not the facade of the upper city, but the crumbling foundation beneath it." He held up a data fragment, its surface scratched and worn. "The prelates are not divine rulers. They are deceivers. They have known the truth about the divine engine all along, that they are not gifts from the creators, but relics of a lost age, a technology they barely understand, a technology that is failing." He stepped closer. "It's failing, Mandor. Their temporal fields are weakening. The distortions are becoming more severe. The anomalies are a symptom of this decay, a harbinger of what's to come." His voice took on a desperate urgency. "We have a chance. We can stabilize the network, avert the collapse, but we need your help. You are the inevitable. They trust you. They will listen to you." He held up the schematics he'd shown me before. "We can still fix this if we work together." His words struck a chord, resonating with the doubts that I had tried so hard to suppress, but my programming, my ingrained loyalty to the prelates, my deeply rooted fear of chaos, rose to the surface, drowning out the voice of reason. "Your truth is a dangerous fantasy," I said, my voice hardening. "It is a path to chaos, to the destruction of everything we have built. The prelates are the only ones who can maintain order, who can protect Viridia from the outside, from itself. They are the reason we are still alive, still safe." "Order?" Varen laughed. "Is this order? This slow decay, this suffocating control, the anomalies, the re-educations, the disappearances, is this the order you are so desperate to protect?" He gestured to his followers. "We are not your enemies. We are your fellow citizens, your brothers. We are all victims of the same lie." He took another step closer. "Don't you see? They are using you. You are their weapon, their enforcer, but you are also their prisoner. Break free. Choose truth over ignorance. Choose freedom over servitude." He was trying to appeal to my humanity, to the part of me that still questioned, that still doubted. But that part was buried deep, suppressed beneath layers of conditioning and the weight of my duty. "There is no freedom in chaos," I replied, my voice cold. "Only suffering and death. The prelates offer stability, order, survival. That is all that matters." My hand moved to my Viridian gauntlets. This was my choice. I could not betray the prelates, could not abandon my duty, could not embrace the chaos that Varen offered. I was the inevitable, the protector of Viridia. Varen's followers were no match for me, their makeshift weapons useless. I took them down quickly. Varen tried to intervene, but I struck him down before he could speak. He struggled to rise, but I was already pointing my gauntlet at him. The energy setting adjusted for neural disruption. I secured the prisoners, but Varen, as the ringleader, required special attention. I brought him before the prelates myself, presenting him as evidence of my unwavering loyalty and the successful suppression of his heretical movement. They observed him in their usual unsettling silence, their masked faces betraying nothing. It was the highest-ranking prelate who finally spoke. "Re-education is required. This one's influence was extensive." He paused, his masked gaze settling on me. "You will perform the procedure, Mandor, personally. Ensure that every trace of his sedition is erased." The Citadel's re-education chambers were located in the deepest levels. It was a place where dissent was silenced, where individuality was erased, where the human spirit was broken and remolded to fit the prelate's rigid design. In the past, my role had been to deliver the subjects for re-education and then leave. But this time was different. The prelates had entrusted me with the task. This was to be my penance, my act of self-flagellation, my way of atoning for the doubts that had plagued me, a way to prove my loyalty to the prelates and to myself. It was also a way to ensure that Verin's heretical knowledge was erased, permanently and completely. Verin was strapped to a metal table, body secured by restraints, head encased in a neural interface device. I began the process, following the standard protocols, but also making subtle adjustments, guided by my intimate knowledge of the man. His personality, motivations, fears, and hopes. I had studied his file, observed his movements, learned his habits. The neural interface allowed me to access Verin's memories, to manipulate thoughts, to reshape the very being strapped before me. I erased the knowledge of the divine engine, replacing it with the prelate's fabricated history. I implanted new memories, false memories, of a life lived in service to the prelates. It was a gruesome process, but I performed it with detachment. I was the inevitable, the instrument of the prelate's will, and this was my duty. After many days, it was done. Verin was reborn, a model citizen, his mind wiped clean, his spirit broken, his past erased. He would serve faithfully, without question, without hesitation. My reward for this act of ultimate loyalty was a promotion, a greater role in the prelate's inner circle. I was given new quarters within the citadel, closer to the heart of power, closer to the divine engine. I was also assigned new duties, more sensitive, more brutal, directly related to the suppression of dissent and the control of the populace. I had become the ultimate enforcer, the prelate's most trusted weapon, second only to them in the chain of command. They praised my dedication, my loyalty, my unwavering commitment to the cause. They saw me as a hero, a savior, the protector of Viridia. The other Crimson Hammers looked at me with awe and fear. I had ascended to a level they could only dream of, but they also sensed the darkness within me. I was their superior, their commander, but I was also a stranger, a man they no longer recognized. Despite my efforts, despite the re-education of Verin and the suppression of his followers, the divine engine continued to fail. The temporal distortions grew more frequent, more severe, affecting larger areas of the city. The anomalies were now appearing with alarming regularity. Their mutations were becoming more horrifying, more extreme. I saw one whose bones protruded through its skin, forming a grotesque, asymmetrical exoskeleton that shifted and cracked with every movement. Another's flesh had become translucent, revealing a network of engorged veins and discolored organs, all functioning erratically. I saw a former citizen whose body had become a horrifying amalgamation of flesh and circuitry, their limbs replaced with salvaged mechanical parts that twitched and sparked, their one remaining human eye wide with terror and pain. There were also those whose bodies could not fully adapt to their mutations, leading to a state of constant decay. It was not uncommon to see anomalies whose flesh was rotting, falling off in chunks, exposing the muscle and bone underneath. The incinerators in the lower levels could barely keep up. The prelates issued increasingly erratic decrees, but their control was slipping, their authority waning, their lies becoming ever more transparent. They instituted mandatory confluences, blaming the increased temporal distortions on the citizens' lack of faith, forcing them to participate in elaborate rituals. Many citizens emerged from these rituals altered, their bodies twisted, their minds fractured, adding to the growing number of anomalies. It was a vicious cycle, a self-perpetuating nightmare. The weather control systems began to malfunction, causing unpredictable weather patterns within Viridia's walls. Storms raged for days, followed by periods of extreme heat or bone-chilling cold. The daylight hours grew shorter, the prelates desperately trying to conserve the divine engine's dwindling energy reserves, plunging the city into an even deeper state of gloom. The populace, once placid and obedient, grew increasingly restless. I continued to carry out my duties, suppressing dissent, hunting down the increasingly horrifying anomalies, enforcing the prelate's increasingly brutal laws. But with each act of violence, each life I dealt with, the weight of my actions became heavier. The gauntlets felt heavier on my arms, and the movements that were once effortless now required a conscious effort. I was trapped in a cycle of violence and repression. The re-education chamber became a place I frequented, drawn to the recorded footage of Verin's sessions. I watched him in those final moments before his re-education, his eyes filled with a defiant fire. Was he right? Was I merely perpetuating a system built on falsehoods? The questions echoed in the silence of the citadel, a silence that was no longer comforting but stifling. These forbidden thoughts were dangerous, heretical, but they lingered, festering in the quiet moments between missions, in the brief moments of rest I allowed myself. I found myself staring at the failing divine engine more and more, no longer with the reverence of the past, but with a cold, analytical gaze. Was it truly a divine instrument, or just a machine, as Verin had claimed? And if it was just a machine, then what did that make the prelates, and what did that make me? These were questions I dared not answer, not yet. But they were there, a constant, unsettling presence beneath the surface of my duty. Sometimes in the dead of night, when the citadel was silent, I would stand before one of these massive constructs, staring into its depths, searching for answers that I knew were not there. I would touch the unyielding metal, trying to feel some connection to the supposed creators, to the power that the prelates claimed to wield. But there was nothing. Only the cold, hard reality of a dying machine. My enhanced genetics were beginning to fail. The very air I breathed seemed to carry the weight of my sins, a constant, suffocating pressure in my lungs. Viridia was dying. The city was in a state of perpetual decline, its once gleaming towers now crumbling, its once ordered society descending into chaos. The energy panels died, casting the metropolis into perpetual darkness. The citizens huddled in their homes, dreading the next temporal distortion, the next anomaly incursion, the next brutal decree from the increasingly desperate prelates. There was no hope for a better future, only the grim certainty of continued suffering, of a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion. And I, Mandor, the inevitable, was trapped in the middle of it all, a prisoner of my own choices, a slave to my programming. I continued to patrol the decaying city, a silent, stoic figure, the guardian of a dying world. I was the inevitable, and my fate, like the city I was sworn to protect, was sealed. I was a machine, and machines do not get to dream. They do not get to hope. They only get to obey. And I would obey until the very end, until the last divine engine flickered and died, and Viridia was finally, mercifully, consumed by the darkness it so richly deserved. I would spend my days patrolling a dying city, enforcing the laws of a regime built on lies, my existence a hollow echo of what it once was. I am Mandor, the inevitable, and this is my eternal damnation.